The constant buzz of traffic outside barely caught Jenna Mitchell's attention as she sat at the small kitchen table in her tight New York apartment. In her hands, a stack of hospital bills felt like a heavy burden. $42,750. The cost of saving her mother's life. Her fingers shook as she ran them over the numbers. She was drained after pulling another double shift at the neighborhood convenience store. 3 jobs, hardly any rest, and a diet of ramen noodles hadn't been enough to keep the debt collectors away. With a deep breath, she stuffed the bills into her bag. No time to linger. Her morning shift at Sunrise Diner started in an hour. The diner was cozy, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a brief escape from her troubles. She had just tied her apron when the doorbell jingled. He walked in like he owned the place. Daniel Harper. Perfectly fitted suit, icy blue eyes, an air of quiet confidence that demanded notice. Jenna had served him before. Always the same order. Double espresso, extra shot, no sugar. Yet, in 8 months, he had never once acknowledged her. Until today. Jenna took a slow breath, forcing her practiced customer service smile as she held the marker over the cup. "Name?" she asked, her voice steady as always. Daniel Harper finally looked up, those sharp blue eyes scanning her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Are you new here?" he asked, brows slightly raised. Jenna's smile didn't waver, though annoyance flickered beneath her calm exterior. "Not exactly. I've been here for 8 months. You just never noticed." A hint of amusement touched Daniel's lips, like she had just caught his interest. Clearly an oversight on my part. He pulled out a sleek black card from his wallet and swiped it without glancing at the price. "Do something else. Have dinner with me." Jenna blinked, caught off guard by the directness of his request. She had dealt with wealthy men long enough to recognize the entitlement in his voice. With a slow, measured movement, she slid his card back toward him. "I don't date, Mr. Harper." Instead of taking offense, Daniel merely tilted his head, a lazy, knowing smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Everything is a price, Jenna," he said smoothly, glancing at her name tag. "It's just a matter of finding the right number." Her chest tightened, the words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. He wasn't just speaking in generalities. He was testing her, pressing against something raw inside her. With a sharp clatter, she set his cup down on the counter, her eyes flashing. "Your espresso will be ready at the end of the bar, and don't come back." Daniel chuckled, unconcerned, and reached into his pocket. A small, embossed business card slid across the counter toward her. $500,000. One night. His tone was casual, as if he were proposing a simple business deal. Jenna froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. Daniel met her gaze unwavering. "You look like someone who could use the money." Jenna wanted to slap him, to shred the card right then and there, but her body betrayed her. Instead of tossing it aside, her fingers brushed the edge, then, almost without thinking, slipped it into the pocket of her apron. When she spoke, her voice was ice. "Your espresso will be ready at the end of the counter." Daniel took his coffee and left without another word. The bell above the door jingled his exit, but Jenna barely heard it over the pounding of her heart. She looked down at her pocket. The business card burned against her skin like a brand. She hated him, hated his arrogance, his audacity, the way he threw around money like it meant nothing. But most of all, she hated the whisper in the back of her mind, the one that spoke of hospital bills, of dwindling options, of a mother running out of time. Jenna sat on the edge of her bed, fingers gripping the small business card so tightly that the edges crumpled. All day she had tried to ignore its existence, but every time she reached into her pocket, it was there, a silent, inescapable reminder. She had always believed she had principles, that she would never trade her dignity for money, but poverty had a cruel way of forcing choices upon people. Beside her, the hospital bills lay in a neat pile, the bold numbers staring back at her like a taunt. $42,750. No amount of overtime would ever be enough. No miracle was coming, but one phone call. One call could change everything. Jenna closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed a number. The The phone rang 3 times before it was answered. Jenna. Daniel's voice was smooth, confident, as if he had expected this. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I hate you," she whispered, as if saying it would somehow preserve the last shred of her pride. Daniel didn't even flinch. "That's not a requirement," he replied, amusement lacing his tone. "I only care about your answer." Jenna's grip tightened on the phone. The words caught in her throat. But when they finally came, they didn't sound like her own. "Tomorrow night, send me the address." There was a brief pause, like he hadn't expected her to give in so easily. But when he spoke again, his voice was just as composed as before. "Royal Windsor Hotel, penthouse suite, 8 p.m. The call ended. Jenna stared at the screen, her pulse pounding so hard she could hear it. What had she just done? The following evening, she stood outside the Royal Windsor, its towering glass facade gleaming under the city lights. The winter air bit at her exposed skin, but her fingers were even colder as they clenched around the strap of her purse. Every step forward felt like a mistake, but turning back wasn't an option. The penthouse was another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the New York skyline, the golden glow of city lights flickering against polished marble floors. But none of it held her attention as much as a man waiting inside. Daniel Harper lounged in a leather chair, a glass of whiskey in hand, his piercing gaze sweeping over her. "You're punctual," he observed, like she was an employee arriving on time for a meeting. Jenna took a steady breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Let's just get this over with." Daniel arched a brow, setting his glass down. "Direct. I like that." He walked over to the table, opened a sleek briefcase, and slid a stack of papers toward her. Jenna glanced down. A contract. Her lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. This was it. The final step. Without hesitation, she picked up the pen and signed her name. A signature on a page, a price agreed upon, a deal made. But neither of them realized that this night wouldn't just bind them legally. It would entangle them in ways neither had seen. Jenna woke up to the soft glow of city lights, filtering to the thick curtains of the penthouse suite. She lay still for a moment, letting reality settle in. The contract was signed. The money was transferred. This was supposed to be the end of it. She turned her head. Daniel was still asleep beside her, his breathing steady. Without his usual sharp gaze, he almost looked human, but Jenna refused to let that thought linger. Slowly, she slipped out of bed, picked up her clothes, and dressed in silence. She had thought she would feel relief. Instead, standing at the elevator, something heavy coiled in her chest. She hadn't submitted to Daniel. Last night, he hadn't commanded her, hadn't treated her like something he owned. He had watched her, waited, let her set the pace. Jenna hadn't begged, hadn't whispered sweet lies, and when he pulled her close afterward, she had calmly, deliberately moved away. He had noticed. "You don't like being held?" His voice had been quiet, laced with curiosity. Jenna had kept her back to him. There's no need to pretend. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he let out a soft chuckle. "Cold, Jenna." She hadn't responded. By the time dawn approached, she was gone. For days passed in silence. No calls, no messages. She told herself this was what she wanted. But somehow, the absence felt heavier than she expected. She should feel relieved. She had done what she had to do. The money was in her account. Her mother's treatment secured. But at night, when the city lights flickered outside her tiny apartment, she couldn't escape the emptiness pressing against her ribs. Was it guilt or something more dangerous? Regret. She shook off the thought. It didn't matter. She had made her choice. Then Nathan Brooks walked into Sunrise Diner. Jenna stiffened as he leaned against the counter, his smirk sharp. "Just wanted to chat about your relationship with Daniel." "There is no relationship," she replied. Nathan placed his phone on the counter. "I think you want to see this." Her world crumbled as she read the messages. "Nathan, but you can't make a girl like that agree." "Daniel, asterisk everyone has a price. It's just a matter of finding the right number. Asterisk Nathan, prove it." "Daniel, asterisk $500,000. One night. Watch me." Asterisk minutes later, she stormed into Daniel's office, her eyes blazing. Explain. Daniel glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. He exhaled. It was a mistake. Jenna let out a bitter laugh. No, Daniel. It was an insult. When he stepped forward, she backed away. Did you ever see me as a person? His silence was answer enough. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out the check, throwing it at him. Take your money, she said, voice shaking, and stay the hell away from me. She walked out. Daniel stood there, staring at the check on the floor. For the first time in his life, he had lost something that money couldn't buy back. Daniel Harper was used to winning. He had bought, acquired, and controlled countless companies. He had crushed rivals, bent markets to his will. But for the first time in his life, he realized that not everything could be bought, and what he had just lost might be the most valuable thing he had ever had. The silence of his penthouse felt suffocating. The bed, too large, too empty. He told himself it was just another business deal gone wrong, just another miscalculation. But every time he reached for his phone, only to stop himself. Every time he passed by Sunrise Diner and saw her laughing with a customer, something inside him cracked a little more. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. Since the moment Jenna walked out, he hadn't been able to focus. Work, billion-dollar deals, the financial empires he had built, all of it felt meaningless. But what haunted him most wasn't the loss. It was knowing that he had hurt her. Jenna was different. She hadn't bowed to money, hadn't played sweet to please him. She was the first person who had ever made him feel small, and that terrified him. He tried texting her, no response. Calling, blocked. But no matter how hard she tried to erase him from her life, Daniel couldn't do the same, which was why he found himself at the hospital. 3 days later, Jenna walked into her mother's hospital room, a cup of hot soup in hand. Mom, She stopped cold. Someone was already there. Daniel Harper. He stood by the bed, his usual arrogant confidence replaced by something quieter, more real. Beside him, her mother's doctor held a folder of medical records. Jenna's stomach clenched. What the hell are you doing here? Daniel turned to her, those blue eyes steady. Making sure your mother gets the treatment she needs. Her grip on the soup tightened. I don't need your charity. The doctor cleared his throat. Jenna, he didn't just cover your mother's medical bills. Thanks to his anonymous donation, we were able to expand the experimental treatment program to more patients. Jenna stared at Daniel, torn between fury and something dangerously close to gratitude. He stepped closer, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I didn't do this out of guilt. I did it because I wanted to help you, help your mother, not because I expect anything in return. Her heart pounded. Could she trust him? 3 weeks later, Jenna received shocking news. Daniel was cutting ties with Nathan and restructuring his company. She stared at the financial article on her phone. Harper Holdings severs partnership with Brooks Investments, a bold move by Daniel Harper she didn't understand. Daniel never made decisions based on morals. He always prioritized profit. So why? The answer came late one night, when a single text lit up her phone from a number she thought she had blocked forever. Asterisk, I know I can't change the past, but I'm trying to be a man worthy of your forgiveness. If you're willing to listen, meet me. No contracts, no money, just two people try to find their way back to who they really are. Asterisk, Jenna sat frozen, her finger hovering over the screen. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but one thing was certain. Daniel Harper was no longer the man she had met 3 months ago, and maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to prove it. Jenna stood outside Sunrise Diner, her eyes fixed on a message glowing on her screen. Asterisk, if you're willing to listen, meet me. No contracts, no money, just two people trying to find their way back to who they really are. Asterisk, she had read it at least a dozen times throughout the day. Most of her wanted to ignore it, but a small part of her, a part she wasn't ready to admit existed, wanted to know if Daniel had truly changed. She took a slow breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before finally typing. Asterisk Tuesday, 8 p.m. Sunrise Diner closes at 7, but I'll have coffee ready. Asterisk Daniel's reply came almost instantly. I'll be there. That evening, Jenna sat in an empty diner, the warmth of the coffee in her hands doing little to calm the unease in her chest. 7:58 p.m. A car pulled up outside and Daniel stepped out. No expensive suit, no commanding presence of a man who owned the world. Just Daniel. Someone trying to earn a second chance. He walked in unhurried, his usual arrogance replaced with something quieter. "You're early." Jenna shrugged. "I work here." Daniel let out a small chuckle, one without mockery. "Where's the coffee?" She gestured toward a table near the window, where 2 steaming cups awaited. They sat across from each other, and the space between them wasn't filled with tension, but with quiet anticipation. Daniel wrapped his fingers around the cup, watching her carefully before speaking. "It took me a long time to realize that not everything in life has a price." Jenna's grip tightened slightly. "And now you think you can buy my forgiveness?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I don't want to buy anything from you anymore." His voice was lower, more sincere than she had ever heard it. "I just want you to know that what I've been doing, it's not about making up for my mistakes. It's about becoming better." She studied him, then set her coffee down. "And you think a few good deeds erase everything?" His gaze didn't waver. "No, but I hope they could be a start." Outside, the streetlights flickered, their glow reflecting on the glass window, as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for her answer. She exhaled slowly, the anger inside her no longer burning as fiercely as before. One coffee doesn't change everything. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What about dinner?" A small, unexpected smile tugged at Jenna's lips. "You really don't give up, do you?" He smiled back, but this time there was no arrogance in his expression, only something soft, something real. "No, because you're worth trying for." For the first time in months, Jenna didn't feel pressured, didn't feel controlled. Just 2 people trying to find each other in a world that had once torn them apart. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was just the beginning. Jenna never thought Daniel Harper was the kind of man who pursued someone with patience. But as it turned out, he didn't give up easily. After that night at Sunrise Diner, he didn't push for forgiveness. No extravagant gifts, no empty promises. Instead, he showed up in quiet, thoughtful ways. Every morning, her coffee was waiting with a small note. "Have a good day." On late nights, he sat in the diner's corner reading, never demanding her attention. Sometimes he simply walked her home, close enough for her to feel his presence, but far enough so she never felt pressured. "I don't expect anything," he said one rainy evening as they sheltered under an awning. "I just want to be here." Jenna paused, studying him, not as a man who once saw everything as a transaction, but as someone trying to be better. Taking a deep breath, she reached out, letting her hand rest over his. "Daniel, I was wrong to think you couldn't change." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then his fingers tightened around hers, his expression softer but resolute. "I won't make you regret this." Jenna hesitated. The past still lingered between them, a shadow that neither of them could completely erase. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the cold, calculating businessman who had once made her an offer in a diner. She saw a man who had fought for her, who had chosen her. Not as a prize, but as something he wasn't willing to lose. She took a deep breath, then finally, truly let go of the doubt. "I know." Beneath the small umbrella in the pouring rain, they stood side by side. No more distance, no more fear. And this time, Jenna didn't let go.